الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والله لا يحب الفساد سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. The next role that we will look at today, inshallah, is the role of a neighbor. And all of us, we, in some capacity or the other, we have this identity that we are a neighbor to someone. This is a very delicate topic. And the reason is because this is something on which the foundation of our deen depends. And many of us, we fall short in this regard. So there is one very famous ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where Nabi Wasallam linked this with our very iman and said that whoever believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the last day, let that person honor their neighbor. Now what that means is that a person who wants to be a true believer, wants to be raised up on the day of Qiyamah as a true believer, a person who has this iman that they have to meet Allah Ta'ala on the day of Qiyamah, on the day of judgment. That person who believes that there is a day of judgment and then they will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day. That is why there is no mention here of belief in messengers or other articles of faith. Only two things are mentioned, that whoever believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and believes in the last day. The one who has iman on Allah and has certainty of meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the last day, meaning the one who has to show his face to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, let that person honor their neighbor. If they honor their neighbor, then they will have a good meeting with Allah Ta'ala, good mulaqat with Allah. And if that person does not honor their neighbor, then it will not be a good meeting. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not look at that person with that gaze of love and mercy. So it's linked with how we want to meet Allah Ta'ala on the last day. In another narration, it's mentioned that let this person be good to their neighbor. He should not harm his neighbor. And when we speak about, till now we were speaking about the rights of relatives and close family relatives like father and mother and brother and sister, spouse. But when we expand and now we think about other relatives, the first and foremost right is that of a neighbor. And another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ emphasized this right so much that he said that Angel Jibreel alayhi salam was the archangel, the leader of all malaika. So Angel Jibreel alayhi salam, he came and he continued to advise me about the neighbor so much, so many times, that I thought that neighbors would be given a share in inheritance, that they would be made an heir, a warith, a waris. And Jibreel alayhi salam came to me repeatedly again and again, advising about the rights of the neighbor, so much so that I began to think that after a person, they die, the neighbor would be included in their inheritance. Now imagine again, who is included in inheritance. When we think about wirasat, we think about our parents, think about our children, spouse, siblings. So the thought of including the neighbor in that category, and from this we can gauge the importance of the neighbor in the deen of Islam. That keeping the neighbor happy, treating them well, this is something which is going to shine and polish a person's iman. In one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that be good to your neighbor and you will become a believer. Be good to your neighbor and then you will become a believer. Yani without good treatment to our neighbors, we cannot even become true believers. Our iman will only be confirmed when our neighbors are happy with us. And this is a very strange thing that Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam said, that whoever is pleased that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, they love him, then let that person be good to the neighbor that he lives nearby. And these are very important words, that the one who is pleased, who feels happy, who likes the thought that Allah Ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ love him, meaning he becomes the beloved to Allah and the Messenger ﷺ, that person should treat their neighbor well. Which means that any person who treats their neighbor well, they become the beloved to Allah Ta'ala, dear to Allah Ta'ala. Their life becomes blessed. Therefore, there is a hadith that good treatment of neighbors, three things are mentioned in this hadith, that good treatment of neighbors, maintaining family ties, and good character. These three things, these three qualities are such that Allah Ta'ala puts barakah in their rizq, in their sustenance, and Allah Ta'ala also puts barakah and increases their lifespan. Their lifespan increases. And he said the person who maintains good relations with their neighbors, does sila rahmi, and has a good akhlaq, these three things will bring barakah. They're a sign of blessings, blessings in that person's life, blessings in that person's rizq and their sustenance. And we speak about today ihsan, that how can we attain ihsan in this role. So the best of neighbors in the sight of Allah Ta'ala, the most ahsan, the excellent neighbor in the sight of Allah, is the one who treats his neighbor well. Now, there's a very ajib, very strange thing about this. There was a man once who came to the Prophet ﷺ. This is a narration from Hakim, rahmatullah alayh. This man came and he said that, Ya Rasulullah, how will I know that I'm a good person? A lot of times people might think about this question, that how do I know if I'm a good human being? How do I know? How will I know that I'm a good person? And I look at the reply. The Prophet did not say that, not mention the things which normally we would think in our own mind, that you pray a lot, or that you fast, or you give so much in charity. But instead, the Prophet ﷺ said that ask your neighbor, if he says you are good, then you are a good person. Ask your neighbor, if he says you're good, then you're a good person. And it is also mentioned in the hadith that if a person's three neighbors are pleased with him, generally there's one neighbor on one side, there's a path on one side, right? So you have neighbors on three sides, one on the right, one on the left, and then one maybe behind. So, and then there's a road in front, or the path in front. So if a person's three neighbors are pleased with them, then if he passes away, when his death comes, Allah Ta'ala will forgive that person's sin. So there is this promise of forgiveness. for having good relations with the neighbors, and not just forgiveness, but even more than that, the Deen of Islam. There is this one hadith which our own Sheikh Azaji, he mentions that every time when I read this and reread this hadith, it always amazes me. And the hadith is 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 an amazing hadith Mubarakah. And it just goes to show the shan and the azmat of the Deen of Islam, the way it respects the rights of other people. In this hadith, it comes that on the day of Qiyamah, Allah Ta'ala will call a person. This person will be presented before Allah Ta'ala, and Allah Ta'ala will say to this person that, O servant of mine, I was hungry and you did not feed me. I was hungry and you did not feed me. And I was thirsty and you did not give water to me. And I was sick and you did not visit me. So that person will be astonished, will be surprised that, Ya Allah, you are free from all of these needs. You do not need anything. How are you saying this? That I was hungry, I was thirsty. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that, look, on such and such an occasion, your neighbor was hungry. If you had fed him, it would have been as if you had fed me. On such and such an occasion, your neighbor was thirsty. If you had given him water, it would have been as if you had given me water. If you had visited him, it would have been as if you had visited me. Allahu Akbar. Now, just we can reflect upon this hadith and we can think that can there be any higher concept than this about the rights of neighbor? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that if you feed your neighbor, it's like you're feeding me. If you're giving water to your neighbor, it's like you're giving water to me. If you're taking care of your neighbor, it's like you're taking care of me. Allahu Akbar. And after these words, we don't have any after this hadith, we don't have any words. We don't have any words to explain further that the maqam, the rank that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to neighbors in the Deen of Islam. So we should realize from all of these ahadiths, the rights of neighbor, how much importance this has in the Deen, in our Sharia. Now, the Sharia also gives us a few details regarding this topic. And in one, it's mentioned that one should fear Allah with regard to the neighbors. And among the happiness of a person is a good neighbor. And the honor of the neighbor upon the neighbor is like the honor of his father, meaning that one should honor the neighbor as one honors their own father. And one hadith, it's mentioned that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends good for someone, then he sweetens him. So the Sahaba Ikram, they asked that, what does it mean that Allah Ta'ala sweetens that person? So the Prophet ﷺ said that it means that Allah Ta'ala makes him beloved to his neighbors. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends good for a person, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes their character in such a way that the neighbors become loving towards him. Then there is also a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ gave us an instruction that when you cook meal, you cook broth or some salan, add a bit more water and give some to your neighbor. And this is not just about food alone. This is any item, if there's any food item, you can try to share it with your neighbor as well. And it's not a matter of sending it every day, but occasionally. Occasionally, keep sending hadiya and gifts to your neighbor as well, so that that relationship remains fresh, that love remains alive. This is something which is liked by the Sharia, that if you are living together in a neighborhood, there should be a visible relationship of love and affection between you and your neighbor. Everyone, they should maintain this relationship, the sila rahmi, this relationship of kinship. A true believer is one who maintains this relationship And the Sharia loves such a community in which everyone they love each other for the sake of Allah. Now, when we speak about neighbors, who are the neighbors? So it's not just generally we think about neighbor, we think about the person on the right, and then on the left, and then back, and then in front. Those four. But in the view of the Sharia, there is a more broader concept of a neighbor. And that is that neighborhood consists of 40 houses in each direction. 40 houses. So there are 40 houses on the right and 40 houses on the left and 40 houses behind. Basically, it means the whole neighborhood is the neighbor. So in the whole neighborhood, that person should live as a good person. Allahu Akbar. These are the teachings of our deen. These are the teachings which are given to us by the Prophet ﷺ. And if we do not have these teachings on our own, using our akal and mind, we could never have thought about these insights. Imagine such a society where everyone takes care, so much care of each other. Truly, this is like a sample of Jannah. So it's not simple, like sometimes in some countries we have these laws of the neighbor. You respect the privacy of the neighbor, and there the laws are really limited. For example, the laws would say something like you should not make noise, the neighbor should not object to that noise, you should not turn on the lights, uh, you should not do this, do that, so that their comfort is not disturbed. It's sort of limited to a few do's and don'ts like that. Uh, but this concept that the Deen of Islam is giving, that you have a loving relationship with them, have a good relationship with them, you take care of them. And if you take care of them, it's like you're taking care of Allah Ta'ala. If you feed them, it's like you're feeding Allah Ta'ala. This concept is we cannot find this anywhere else in the world. This is something which is unique to our deen, so beautiful, so beautifully fitted within our deen. And uh, there is one uh, one hadith uh, which mentions something about again very ajib. Allah Ta'ala loves this sulha, loves reconciliation. So in that hadith, it's mentioned that on the day of Qiyamah, the first two disputants, two people who will be disputing, the first two disputants on the day of Qiyamah will be two neighbors, two neighbors. And one of them will say that, Ya Allah, this person, this neighbor of mine, he hurt me in the dunya. I was distressed because of him. He was pious and religious, but he would cause a lot of distress and discomfort to me. Oh Allah, now I want my revenge. I want my compensation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that, okay, then we give you permission that you can take this person's good deeds. Now, when this person will begin taking the good deeds, he will take all the good deeds of that person. And still, he will not be satisfied. He will say that, Allah, I have taken these good deeds, but these good deeds are less. This person, he he distressed me and much more. He pained me, hurt me much more than what I've taken from him. I want more good deeds. So then Allah Ta'ala will say that, okay, you can place your sins on that person. You can lighten your load of sin. So this neighbor, he will then put all of his sins on the shoulder of the other. And then he will say that, Allah, I've put all my sins on that other person's shoulder, but still I feel pained in my heart. I still feel that I've been wronged by my neighbor. My heart is still not happy. So then Allah Ta'ala will say that, okay, why don't you look there? And he will be pointed to a particular direction. Why don't you look in that direction? And he will see that there's a house, a beautiful palace, a castle in Jannah. Very beautiful, extremely pretty. And when he looks at that palace, he will wish, I wish I could also have a palace like that. I wish I could live there forever. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that, oh my servant, that do you have a desire for that palace? Do you want to live there forever? And he will say that, yeah, Allah, yes, certainly I want to be there. And Allah Ta'ala will say, okay, if you can forgive your brother, if you can forgive your neighbor, then we can give you a place, a spot in that palace. So this neighbor whose heart was so hurt and he was so distressed and pained, he would then say that, Allah, I have forgiven my neighbor. And Ya Allah, you grant me this palace in Jannah. Now, when this will happen, Allah Ta'ala will say, okay, now that you've already forgiven him, why do you want to go into Jannah all alone? Why don't you take this neighbor, brother of yours with you in Jannah? Because I like sulah, I like reconciliation. So on the day of Qiyamah, that day as well, in the dunya, Allah Ta'ala loves sulah. On the day of Qiyamah, also Allah Ta'ala loves sulah. And so on that day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will love this sulh, reconciliation between the two neighbors, and Allah ta'ala will make both of them enter into Jannah. So we should try that we live this life of love and affection and sulh, reconciliation with our neighbors in this dunya, so that Allah ta'ala becomes pleased with us. There are three types of neighbors in the Sharia. One is a neighbor who is also a believer, a person of Iman, and also a relative related to you. And this neighbor, he has the greatest, this person, they have the greatest rights, three rights. They have the right of Islam, they have the right of kinship, and the right of being a neighbor. So one is this category, who has three rights over you. Then some neighbors are those who have two rights. These are neighbors who are also Muslim. These are neighbors who are also Muslims. And then there are also some neighbors who just have one right, that these are the neighbors, but they're not people of Iman. They're disbelievers, but still they're neighbors. They also have a right over us. So especially if you're living in a place where you have a neighbor who's not a Muslim, a non-Muslim, then Islam gives them this right as well. They have a right of neighbor. So imagine if a non-Muslim neighbor has a right, then what about the rights of a neighbor who is a relative plus a Muslim? Even if he is a sinner, a sinning Muslim, a transgressing Muslim, a wrongdoer, the ulama, they have written that it's necessary to treat him well. His own matter and amal are with Allah Ta'ala, but for us, he's still a neighbor. And if he's a non-Muslim, if they're a non-Muslim, if they're a Jew or a Christian, still we're supposed to deal with them well because they are our neighbor. There was a person who was sitting and there was a group there. And he said that, how often will you mention this Jew, that this Jew gave him this, gave him that? So this person, he said that I've heard the Prophet ﷺ say that I was so much advised about the rights of neighbor that I began to think that perhaps the neighbor would be made a rightful heir after death. And it's in the hadith that if someone is building a house in the neighborhood and they want to put his beam on your wall to make a roof, don't refuse him because he's your neighbor. And it's necessary for a person to protect the honor, their chastity, especially honor, chastity of the neighbor's women, just as it is necessary to protect the honor and chastity of the women of his own household. So protecting the neighbors, their property, their their uh, their honor, their their life, their chastity. This is something which is a requirement. This is something which is necessary for us. And these teachings might seem a bit strange for us in our times, but it's just because we're living in a strange time. We're living in a time where we're going away from the natural fitrah that Allah Ta'ala has embedded us with. Um, in pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah, which normally we say was Jahiliyyah, days of ignorance, but still people had this common sense and common decency that they would treat their neighbors well, despite all the other sins and wine, drinking wine, and the other burying daughters alive, and the things that they used to commit. But they still had this respect and for neighbor. They understood the importance of the rights of neighbor even in that time. Hazrat Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu says that even in the time of ignorance and pre-Islam, Jahiliyyah, three things were still very good. Only three things were good qualities that existed in that muashra and that environment. Uh, Even the mushrikeen and the disbelievers, they also used to take care of these three things. And these were three good things. The first thing was that they used to honor their guests, honoring their guests. So Quraysh, the tribe of Quraysh, was well known, quite famous for this quality, that whoever their guests were, they would always honor their guests. And second thing was that they would not divorce an old woman. And when a woman has spent her life, has children, she is now mature in old age, to divorce her in old age, this is like the height of foolishness. That the people at that time, they would view that this woman, she has invested her youth on you, and if you're divorcing her at this age, uh, this will leave her. Where will she go? And they felt that this is against humanity. This should not be done. So they would not divorce an old woman. And the third thing he mentions was that they used to help the neighbor in paying off their debt. These three things were done by disbelievers, by the mushrikeen of Makkah Mukarramah, pre-Islam, in pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah. So in pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah, if they were so careful about the rights of neighbors and help the neighbors and take care of them, when Islam came, Islam took these rights to a completely, entirely different level altogether. And just like there are these fazail and virtues and merits about taking care of your neighbor, conversely, we also have the other side, severe warnings about doing bad to your neighbor. And we should understand those teachings as well. Very strong words. In one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that the one who troubles his neighbor is accursed. La'nat, Allah's la'nat is upon them. La'nat means that that person is deprived of the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we're in the month of Ramadan, it's the month of rahmat. And remember that rahmat and la'nat cannot be combined. So if we want to receive that rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need to make tawbah, and we need to let go and remove all those a'mal and actions which are putting us outside the fold of Allah's rahmah, which are making us deserving of this la'na. One of them is this, that one who troubles their neighbor. One who troubles their neighbor, if one is troubling their neighbor, they're accursed. This Allah's curse is upon them. A curse means that they're placed outside the fold of Allah's rahmah. And then how can this person expect to receive that rahmah when they've been picked and placed outside? So this person then becomes deprived even in this blessed month. So very important to make tawbah, to make amends, to reconcile, so that once we can remove these obstacles, then we can attain that rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In one hadith, it's mentioned, Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam said about a woman. There was a woman who used to pray all night. She used to pray all night and she used to fast all day. Sa'imud dahr, qa'imutul layl. But she used to be abusive to her neighbors. She would fight with her neighbors, dispute with them, abuse them, small things, quarrel with them. And Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam said about this, remember, she's a tahajjud guzar. She's praying tahajjud, not once and twice or 1 month. This was her whole life. Her entire life, she prayed tahajjud, praying all night and fasting all day, not just in the month of Ramadan, but this was her habit of fasting. So imagine, from by our standards, we would think that she would be such a muttaqiya, abida, and sa'ima, and we would think she is destined to Jannah because of her ibadat. And yet, Nabi Wasallam said that she's pious in this sense, but because she was abusive to her neighbors, this woman is destined for the fire, for Jahannam, for the punishment. So remember the one, a person who prays tahajjud all night and they're fasting all day. But if she's abusive to her neighbors, then Nabi Wasallam said, and this is in the hadith, that among the signs of Qiyamah, right, among the signs of Qiyamah will be bad neighbors, bad neighbors. So if our neighbors are not happy, if we hurt and abuse them, denigrate and deride them, we break their heart, then despite our fasting and our salah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take that person to account. And this is mentioned in such clear words, and in such straightforward, clear words. The Prophet ﷺ is saying that if you hurt the heart of your neighbor, then despite your piety and goodness and fast, a person will be placed inside the fire. So this means that this is a very important topic that we need to learn. One of the signs of Qiyamah, like we said, will be bad neighbors and people who break ties of kinship. Yani this is Sila Rahmi. Yani if these two signs are found, then it's a sign that Qiyamah is near. And in one hadith it said that this is a classic question that people ask as well sometimes, that what if my neighbor is it's a bad neighbor, so how am I supposed to respond? So in this hadith it's mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah loves that person whose neighbor is bad. Allah loves that person whose neighbor is bad, who troubles him, and yet this person does sabr, doesn't take revenge, doesn't reciprocate, doesn't respond, leaves the affair in the hands of Allah Ta'ala and exercises sabr. Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, people would pelt him with stones, and the Prophet ﷺ never took revenge, never took a stone and then pelted them back. We don't find that in the Sunnah, in the seerah of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. People would do zulm, they would wrong him, and yet Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam did not reciprocate or respond, rather just left the matter to Allah Ta'ala and just practice sabr. And this is that person whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. Allah loves that person whose neighbor is bad, who troubles them, and yet this person doesn't reply, doesn't throw, doesn't shoot back, but rather just practices sabr, fortitude, perseverance, leaves the matter in the hands of Allah. Similarly, there's another hadith where someone asked the Prophet ﷺ that which sin is the greatest of sins. And Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam mentioned a few things. The first was shirk, to associate partners with Allah Ta'ala. Then the questioner, he said that, no, I asked that which is the next greatest, and after shirk, which is the next greatest sin. So Nabi Wasallam said, it's to kill your offspring, your children, for this fear that how will you feed them? Where will they eat? Many people that have this, they unfortunately in some cultures they kill their children. They have abortions. Why? Because again this question that where will we earn? How can we earn enough to feed them? So whoever does this act with this intention, the Prophet ﷺ said that after shirk, this is the second greatest sin. Then he says, I asked that which is the next greatest sin? And the Prophet ﷺ said, it's to commit adultery with your neighbor's wife. It's to commit adultery with your neighbor's wife. So here, we should not misunderstand that good treatment towards your neighbor is not saying that you go beyond the boundaries of the Sharia and you interact with non-mahram men, or if you're a woman, non-mahram, if you're a man, then non-mahram women, people who are unrelated to you, you act in such a way which are outside the boundaries of the Sharia, that you're so soft and so loving, especially if they're young neighbors, then one has to be careful. One has to be careful. Otherwise, nafs and shaitan, they are always there with us. And one of their attacks is this, that they try to put these desires and temptations in the heart of a person. So one has to remain within the limits of the Sharia and then practice all these teachings about taking care of your neighbor, treating them well, honoring them, protecting them, doing husn suluk with them. Abu Lubaba, rahmatullah alayh, he mentioned that there are 7 types of people that whom Allah Ta'ala will neither speak on the day of Qiyamah, la yukallimuhum, nor will Allah Ta'ala forgive their sins, nor will Allah Ta'ala purify them, but they will be sent straight to the fire. Seven types. And some of them, one of them is a person who practices sodomy. The other is a person who practices, who has relations with an animal. Then there's a person who practices sodomy with a woman, or similarly a person who marries both a mother and her daughter at the same time, and similarly a person who's not good to their neighbor. And imagine this bad treatment towards neighbor is being placed in this category of these big ugly and heinous sins. That's where the Prophet is putting this in that list. Sufyan Sauri rahmatullah alayh used to say that there are 10 things which are injustices, which are grave zulm. Number 1, to pray for oneself but forget your parents. And this list is also very interesting, not just because of our topic, but also many things we might not even imagine. We might not even view them to be a zulm. So first thing he's mentioning is that you pray, you're making dua for yourself, but you don't make dua for your parents. That's a zulm. You just oppressed yourself. You just did injustice to your parents. They had a right over you that when you make dua for yourself, because of your parents, biologically, physically, they brought you, they were the physical asbab, the sabab, by which you're here in this world. So if you are there and you are making dua for yourself, you should also be making dua for them. Second, he says, to know how to read the hadith, to know how to read the Quran, but still does not read even 100 verses in the whole day. I want all of us to reflect upon this, that this is termed as zulm and an injustice for someone who has the ability to read the Quran, but they don't recite even 100 verses in one day. Third, to enter the mosque, the masjid, and leave without offering two rakat. Two rakat. Number four, to pass by the graveyard or cemetery and not read anything or something and dedicate it to the people there who are deceased. This is also an injustice. To do some isal sawab. This is also from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Similarly, number five, in a place, if there's a scholar, an alim that is present, and then still people do not learn and take knowledge from that scholar, that this is a na-qadri, this is ingratitude, this is also a type of injustice, that Allah blesses you with an alim, with a scholar in your locality, in your area, in your community, and still you don't take benefit from that person's ilm. Number six, two people who walk on the same path and do not even ask each other's name. This is also injustice. And we can broaden the scope here, not just walking on the same path. So for example, two people sitting on the bus or two people on the flight sitting next to each other. So two people side by side. This is like the right of companionship, the right of companion, the right of your jamba, of your side, the person on your side. You look at the details of the Sharia, that even that person who's on your side, sitting on the side for one trip, 1 hour trip, or for a few minutes, if they're on the side, by your side, they have a right over you uh, to walk on the same path, two people, and you don't even ask each other's name. This is also viewed as injustice. And there should be at least this much, that you just introduce yourself and then say that, you introduce yourself, they introduce them. That's the level that is being mentioned here. The number seven, that to be in the city on Friday and not be present in the masjid. Yani don't pray Friday Jummah in the masjid. And number eight, that if a Muslim invites and the other does not accept, this is also injustice. Invite someone for a dawat and without any shari reason. If there's a shari excuse, then you can excuse yourself. That would not count as a wrongdoing or a zulm. But without any valid reason, just to refuse that invitation and not go, this is also viewed as a zulm, as an injustice. And second last, number nine, a person who wastes their youth and does not acquire knowledge during that youth, this is also zulm. That Allah blessed you with this fertile time, the most productive time of your life, which is your youth, when you had every blessing, you had your age, you had health, you had the time, you had that energy, you had that intellect, that intelligence, all the asbab which were required for acquiring knowledge, you had everything, and yet you did not acquire knowledge. This again is ingratitude. This is also a type of injustice. And the 10th and the last point is that person who they eat their own fill while their neighbor remains hungry, this is also injustice. So that you're eating and your neighbor doesn't have anything to eat. Now, when we speak about the rights of the neighbor, what are the rights of neighbor? What are the things that we should be careful about in this regard? So, may Allah Ta'ala give jaza khair to the Sahaba Ikram. Really, they did not leave anything. They asked everything that was relevant. This is the beauty of the Sahaba. This is the big favor, the ihsan they did upon all of us by asking these questions. So, it comes in a riwayat that one companion, one Sahabi, they came and they asked the Prophet ﷺ, that, O Messenger of Allah, what right does my neighbor have over me? That's our question. What right does my neighbor have over me? And now the Prophet ﷺ mentioned a few things. He said, number one, that if your neighbor becomes ill, you visit them. If they die, you accompany their janaza. If they ask you for a loan, you give them a loan, and you give them a good loan. If they receive some goodness, some happiness, some joy, you congratulate them. You share your happiness with them. If they're afflicted with a calamity, a distress, then you console them. You share their grief. Means that you express your sympathy. If you build a house, a home, do not build the wall so high that it blocks their air or their sunshine. This will cause them trouble. Don't do that. Don't build house and homes like that. And that's the reason why the scholars, the ulama, they have written that if they call you in times of need, you go to them. If they ask for help, you help them. If they're in trouble, you visit them. If they die, you attend their funeral. If you go on a journey, if if uh, if the neighbor goes on a journey, then you take care of their possession. You take care of their house, their home, their wealth, their honor as much as possible. Don't cause them trouble. And if you look at the lives of the Salaf Salihin, the the early Muslims, the pious predecessors, they did amal upon all these teachings. They used to take a lot of care, great care of their neighbor. In one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that, Wallahi, by Allah, I swear by Allah, in whose hand is my soul. Meaning that Nabi Wasallam is saying, and this is I've taken an oath, that by Allah, in whose hand is my soul, only the one upon whom Allah has mercy can fulfill the rights of the neighbor. So even in fulfilling the rights of the neighbor, this can only be done with the rahmat of Allah Ta'ala. That person upon whom Allah Ta'ala places His mercy, they can fulfill this right. No one else can. No one else can. And this is, how far we are from these teachings, far away, so distant from these teachings. Nowadays, people, they don't even know the names of their neighbor. Who's on the right is, who's on the left. They don't even know. They think that, well, what do we have to do with this? It's not my concern. It's not it doesn't concern me. Now we'll mention one or two stories before we end. There's the story about Abdullah bin Tahir. He was an elderly person. Once he saw someone who had come to buy a house at a neighbor's door. And he was saying to her that I will give you the price of the house as you demand. Just give me this house. And the neighbor said that I would sell the house, but I cannot sell the neighborhood of Abdullah bin Tahir. I don't want to leave this neighborhood because Abdullah bin Tahir is here. When Abdullah bin Tahir, rahmatullah, heard this, that the neighbor is saying, I cannot sell the neighborhood of Abdullah bin Tahir, that she was needy, but she said that I cannot sell. So Abdullah bin Tahir, rahmatullah, called that woman and asked her that, how many children do you have? And she said, my husband passed away, I have 4 daughters. And then Abdullah bin Tahir, rahmatullah, he found matches for her 4 daughters, and 4 proposals for her 4 daughters. He himself financially arranged the marriages of all 4 daughters. He gave each daughter a dowry, a meher, and then sent them off. And he arranged the farewell, the rukhsati as well, of the neighbor's 4 daughters. Now, these were the rights of the neighbors. These were the neighbors of the past. This is how they would take care of the neighbors. This is how the level of care that they had. And imagine in those days, 1 dinar was very valuable. 1 dinar was very valuable. Abdullah bin Tahir, rahmatullah, he gave 100,000 dinars in dowry to each daughter. And then just like someone arranges the farewell of his own daughter, That is how he arranged the farewell of the four daughters of the neighbor in the same way. And why? Because that woman, she did not have any guardian. So he found matches like a father. He became like a father, found matches. And you think at the level, how pure, how good our elders, our Akabirin used to be as neighbors. So may Allah Ta'ala give us such good neighbors in this dunya. May Allah Ta'ala give us such good neighbors in Akhirah as well. We'll just end with one last story, which is about a famous story about Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahmatullah alayh. Very big wali, friend of Allah Ta'ala, also a muhaddis, a faqih, a jurist. So he had a house, and there was a Jew who used to live in that neighborhood. So the Jew had to go somewhere, and the Jew thought that, why don't I sell my home? So a Muslim came and said that I'm willing to buy your home. And he said to the Jew that, what are you demanding for your house? And the Jew said that I am demanding 2,000 dinars for my home. Now the buyer was very surprised, astonished. He said that that's a lot. He said, in this neighborhood, the house is normally the range for about 1,000 dinar. Very easily, 1,000 very easily. That's the price of the house in this neighborhood. So why are you asking me double? And the Jew replied that what you're saying is right, that 1,000 dinar is the price of the house, and the other 1,000 dinars is the price of the neighborhood of Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahmatullah. Allahu Akbar. And yet one time in our history, we were like this, that the prices of our homes in our neighborhood used to increase. The prices would increase. And may Allah Ta'ala make us such neighbors.
Amen.
Uh, so if we act on these teachings of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, then inshallah, surely we can become a good member of the society, a good member of the household, a good human being. And we can also live as a good abd and a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we make dua that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all of us the tawfiq to act upon these teachings. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us a life of taqwa and tahara. May Allah ta'ala include us among His accepted beloved servants in this dunya and in the akhirah. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. سبحان ربي الوهاب اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. وصلى الله تعالى على حبيبه خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.